It is a secret to no one that I like MOBAs. After spending over $2,000 on a custom 75mm figure based on one of my favorite characters from Heroes of Newerth, a dead MOBA, I'm feeding for another. But my wallet has different thoughts. Oh God, please no! Oh Jesus! Thanks to this video's sponsor, Fiverr, we can have our cake and eat it too. Today I'm painting Void Spirit, another mid laner just like Fade, the last MOBA character that I painted, but this time I'm repping Dota 2, a significantly more popular video game. I don't get a ton of time to play Dota, but when I do, I'm spamming Void Spirit as much as I can. I was even live coached by some of Dota 2's foremost content creators, Banana Slam Jamma, or BSJ for short, on how to play Void Spirit and the mid lane better. If you want to see me get verbally destroyed, the link to that video is in the description below. Today, however, we'll be getting some payback, as I'm a significantly better mini painter than I am a Dota player, fortunately for us all. This video comes at a pretty timely moment as Valve is hosting the International in October, the Super Bowl of video games with a prize pool of tens of millions of dollars. This character was sculpted by a Fiverr freelancer, a process you'll hear more about later. I printed it on my Frozen Sonic Mini 8K printer using Resion's M70 Precision resin. The STL for the model I've made available for free, and you can download it at the link in the video description. Void Spirit has big monk energy, so I figured I'd bust out some smooth river stones to stack on his base like you'd see when visiting your local park. These stones are very easy to make. Whenever I have leftover putty of any kind, I roll it into a sphere with a gloved finger and squash it down slightly to give it an oval shape. Boom, river stones. Or, a very large pile of shit until I paint it to look like something different. With the base complete and what little prep there is on this 3D print, we can get the mini primed and start painting. Void Spirit is an interesting character because he's largely purple. One of the challenges of mini painting is getting all your details to stand out from a couple feet away. And when we're chatting about a 1-inch tall model, that can be an interesting challenge. It gets even more interesting when the majority of the model is one hue. So we kind of have to be clever. Luckily for me, purple is a pretty flexible color. What I mean by that is that it can swing both warm, cold, light, and dark and still look pretty good, whereas a color like blue or yellow might struggle a bit. Using a warmer purple, I began zenithly highlighting the skin of Void Spirit. While doing this, I was avoiding a stripe down the middle of his face, a detail of the character I was trying to include. The keen-eyed among you may notice that I am painting him incorrectly, which I didn't realize until I started to look at the concept art with the model right next to me. Whenever painting from any kind of reference, it's a great idea to have it right next to you to check it constantly. Void seems to be internally glowing, like his skin is translucent and his eyeballs are the source of his light. When I realized my mistake, I began pushing paint toward his eye sockets, the tops of his cheeks, and under his eyebrows to strengthen the highlight in those areas. I was intentionally not using the magenta color you see in the concept art yet. My plan is to paint over this highlighted section with some fluorescent pink paint when everything is said and done, but I can't find my fluo paint at the moment. I have it all in a box somewhere. Here's the footage proving it, but I can't find it, so I'll just look for it later and keep painting for now. To further fix my mistake, I began slowly glazing some diluted purple toward the back of his head, further away from the light source, his eyeballs. But this was getting me nowhere fast, so I did something a little bit more severe. I painted the shape I was after with a dark purple paint and then slowly glazed that harsh transition line to hide it. With that done, I also highlighted the stripe in the middle of his face with a color closer to indigo, so slightly more blue in hue. We're beginning to take advantage of the aforementioned flexibility of purple using a cooler color immediately next to a warmer one for some additional contrast. I pushed the highlight on this stripe down toward the brow instead of higher up on his forehead like I normally would do to match the rest of the highlighting going on his face, focused around his eyes. By the way, if you want to watch me paint live and ask questions and whatnot, I was painting this part of the model live on one of my streams. I stream mini painting on Tuesdays from 1 to 4 p.m. CST, link in the video description. Next up, the beard, and a lesson in layering. I want this beard to eventually be white, and we're starting from black. I'll begin with a base coat of dark gray that I mix from black and also an off-white yellow. I use off-white yellow instead of a normal white because I'll create a more interesting gray that can slightly contrast with the purple on the model, yellow being the hue contrast of purple. I continue to use that same yellow to mix brighter and brighter highlights. When you first start layering, your inclination might be to leave behind some amount of dark gray in literally every deep part of whatever it is you are layering on. But on higher areas like the top of his beard and his ponytail, I essentially base coat again, entirely covering up my base coat with a lighter gray. On details lower, like the bottom of his beard or lower on his ponytail, I leave behind some dark gray in those recesses. As my highlights get brighter and more obviously yellow, I begin to mix in some white paint as well. I don't necessarily want his beard to look yellow-gray, but more like an interesting gray. You know, the kind of gray that's into farm-to-table restaurants and black and white films.
Oh, yes, quite indeed. Oh, nice guys, never heard of it. Show me North by Northwest.
Okay, that's enough. As my highlight gets brighter and brighter, I begin to leave behind more and more gray on the higher up details. As my paint gets brighter, I'm also neglecting to highlight lower parts of the beard. If we had to break down his beard and what paints I'm using in each section, it might look something like this. Not until the very end am I actually using white paint, and only very sparingly. Not a lot is needed to get the impression of white, especially surrounded by all this dark purple. Using this method, you can layer up your highlights and get a nice zenithal effect from a flat base coat. No airbrush needed. Onto the purple robe he's wearing. Similar to the stripe down his face, I'll be using a cooler color to contrast nicely with the skin immediately next to this fabric. I'll mix a highlight with the exact same color we've been using for the white hair to mix our highlights. If you need help understanding where to apply your highlights, check out this video I have linked in the top right hand corner of the screen. I then moved on to whatever piece of fabric is below his robe, and I chose again a warmer purple, but I tried to mix it up this time. Instead of using the typical off-white yellow to mix my highlight, I wanted to try a cooler hue, a turquoise. I often like to mix a purple highlight with a color such as this, so I thought I'd give it a try here. Soon thereafter, I found out that I was starting to get a color that was very similar to the other robe. I then backpedaled a little bit by glazing a warm purple color over that fabric and retried again with a new color, a skin tone from scale 75. I felt like I'd be an artistic hack if I kept relying on good old faithful Vallejo ice yellow. I realize that it's perfectly fine for these two pieces of fabric to be the exact same color, but for whatever reason, I just can't stand for it. Whenever one detail ends and another begins, I must change the color of the detail. Anyone else paint like that? It definitely slows down the painting process, but I think if you know what you're doing in terms of color selection, it can make for a really nice paint scheme when you pay attention to all the individual details especially. I'll share some color scheme tips with you later in the video to help you paint like this if you're interested. For now though, let's hear a brief word from our sponsor. Fiverr connects you with freelancers with ease. You can find illustrators, sculptors, website developers, and more. Whether you're splurging on a custom model for your character in an RPG campaign or rebranding your commission service with a new logo, Fiverr has you covered. For me personally, Fiverr has allowed me to save time, the most valuable resource to a small business owner. I try and mostly fail to wear a lot of hats, and while I do have a background in software engineering, I simply don't have the time to overhaul my website while also dealing with everything else going on with the channel. With Fiverr, I was able to find a freelancer who was able to deal with my relentlessly pedantic feedback, producing a beautiful, newly reskinned Miniac.co, along with extra features as well. He was able to help me set up wholesale ordering on the website, and while I haven't fully finished configuring it, I'm looking forward to being able to sell some product directly to game stores in the future. The model we're painting today was also sculpted by a Fiverr freelancer. Personally, I thought I was going to have a hard time finding a sculptor that I'd be okay working with. But about 30 minutes later, I was messaging 3 different sculptors asking for their portfolios, and a couple minutes later, I got hooked up with Felix 3D Art. I had a tighter timeline than normal, and Felix was able to accommodate, and after a few rounds of feedback, he produced a wonderful Void Spirit model in 32mm scale, which I have learned is not an easy thing to do after trying to sculpt my own 32mm models. All of the details are expertly heroic scale, so nothing feels too challenging to paint while also not being too cartoonishly out of proportion. If you are in need of some contract work from a myriad of different fields, head over to Fiverr to get in touch with a skilled freelancer. You'll find a link in the description and also a coupon code for 10% off whatever services you need. Alright, back to painting what Barney would have looked like if he hit the gym more often and was also an interdimensional monk. On to the black paints. Black is one of the trickier colors to get right. You need to make sure a lot of pure black and near black sticks around to make it appear as black when all your highlighting is said and done. I'm often going back and forth with shadow colors and highlight colors to adjust this ratio. In general, there's much more faffing about with black compared to other colors. If you need help understanding the concept of how much to highlight black, check out the video I've linked in the top right hand corner of the screen. For the colors, I'm using the same paints as the beard, just a different value region. In this case, value refers to how bright the colors are. For the beard, we were working somewhere up here in this region. For the pants, we're much further down the value scale. This is a great trick to get more mileage out of your paint scheme. We're not using different hues or paints in this case here. We're just adjusting the value, or again, brightness, so it's almost like we're getting another color for our model that's basically guaranteed to look good in our scheme. Let's do that value trick again with yet more fabric on this model. I'm going to paint this loincloth with a mauve-like color, which is basically a fancy word for a specific kind of purple. While painting the loincloth, I also painted whatever the bumpy fabric was next to his skin with the same color. I felt like this color was going to be too bright and too low a detail on the model, so I wanted to give it more of a larger role in my scheme by painting other parts of the model with it. This does deviate from the concept art for Void Spirit, but some deviation is required when going from a video game character to a mini. As mentioned previously, the paints we're using on this loincloth are the same colors as one of the many robes we have painted in the past, but just a lighter version of it. Instead of using ice yellow, I'm going to use yellow and white individually. This allows me to dial in how much yellow and white paint I want. Maybe I want more yellow to desaturate the purple without increasing the brightness as much. Having the individual paint allows me the freedom to make that creative choice, whereas with a pre-mixed paint, I'd be locked into whatever the manufacturer decided for me. Don't forget to periodically come back in with a recessed shade color to make your paint job look nice and neat. And don't sweat making mistakes. Look, I just made a mistake right there. You can always fix stuff like that. If you need any help with recessed shading, check out the video linked in the top right hand corner of the screen. If you don't have time to check out a whole nother video, the basic idea is you want a sharp AF brush and paint with a low viscosity and high flow that has good coverage. Consider mixing paint with a matching ink to get a product with these characteristics. Now, on to Void Spirit's blades. At first, I was really struggling with the blend because I was trying to wet blend across the bevel of the blade. A hard edge like this that physically breaks up a surface is hard to make a transition across. Eventually, I figured out that I should instead achieve my progression of colors with layering instead of wet blending, which is what I did. Once I had all the colors where I approximately wanted them, I could start to soften some of the transition lines with other techniques like glazing. Still haven't found the fabled blocks of fluo paint, still looking, so on to the next part. The gem in the middle of Void Spirit's waistline is a nice combination of both warm and blue purples. It's actually almost entirely blue in the concept art, so I'll make sure to include a lot of indigo color. I'm treating this color like any other gem, taking some inspiration from the concept that includes a crack in the middle of the gem. I'm pushing most of my highlight toward the bottom of the gem while keeping the top very dark with a couple of bright specular highlights. This reversal of normal highlights, which typically go top to bottom, can often give something a reflective feel, no thinking required. This process was very futzy. There was lots of back and forth with the palette, getting new paint, applying it to the gem, cleaning my brush, feathering the paint, rinse and repeat until it looks close. This kind of discovery process where I don't know exactly what I'm doing, painting a triangular gem with a crack in it, often looks like this. I'm reacting to what's happening on the model. If you want to see the entire process with my commentary, consider signing up for my Patreon. You get access to the Supercut edition of this video where I show you all my painting footage sped up while I wax poetic about miniature painting. For the robe, I used a colder hue, like my soul. For Void's shoulders, he has a fun pattern that consists of circles with parallel lines inside of them. Considering that circles are the absolute bane of freehanders across the globe, I'll instead paint the shoulders with just parallel lines, being inspired by the concept, but a little simpler for a 32mm model. I opted to highlight the lines where a normal zenithal highlight would happen towards the tops of each individual plate of shoulder armor to add a little more interest to the freehand. Don't forget that you can always come in with a corrective color, in this case black, to thin up the lines and make everything look nice and crispy. Going back and forth is very normal. Now, onto the metals. At first, I tried to mix a color that was close to the concept art and then reverted to a lighter, pre-mixed option so it would show up better against the mostly black shoulder armor. I then applied a black glaze as a shadow as if I was painting NMM. Instead of only thinking about the trim, I imagined the entire shoulder as metal, which helps me place my highlights and shadows. It's also important to think about how most people will be looking at your model when painting in this style, because your highlights and shadows are a function of your viewer, the shape of your object you're painting, and also where your light source is. For this guy, the standard viewing angle is dead on from the front. With the shading done and a little too aggressive, I come in with a highlight I mix with a brighter pale gold paint. I can now reduce the size of my shadow, which got a little out of control, and increase the contrast. I find TMM paint fairly easy to blend because the natural shininess obscures a lot of blending mistakes you might have. If you want any help figuring out where to place your highlights and shadows on a reflective surface, check out this video linked in the top right hand corner and below in the description. On to the base. Still can't find that fluo pink paint. I blended the dirt texture with a yellow and purple, keeping with the ongoing theme here on the model. I wanted the center of the base to be the brightest, drawing the attention to the figure in the middle. I painted the river rocks with browns, grays, and everything in between, and then began to stipple on some rougher texture. It's important here to have a good variety with your colors, so go crazy with mixing. With that complete, I added some dirty down moss in the cracks where moisture would collect, and then taking advantage of the fact that this stuff reactivates with water, I added some dark green ink drips to the rocks. The water in the ink will reactivate the product and blend with it to create a nice, subtle effect. Or at least that's what I'm telling myself. With the paint work complete, it's time for some static grasses. I added some small purple flowers again, keeping with the theme, as well as some tiny tufts. Lastly, I took some longer fibers and bunched them together and snipped them to a typical scale model cattail length. I then super glued the ends together, and with that dry, I placed it on my base. I put the longer terrain features behind the model to avoid crowding the scene too much. With the river stones, some cattails, and lastly some shallow water effect with some Mod Podge dimensional magic, Void Spirit feels like he's in the middle of a river, which feels like a monkish thing to do, if that's a word I can use. It's also an homage to the video game because you'll often find Void Spirit in the mid lane, which contains a river running right through it. Okay, the box of fluorescent paint is dead to me for now, so I bought the only option I could find in my local game store. I began glazing over the brighter parts of the gem, the face, the runes, and the blades. Wherever the model has white and lilac on these parts, basically it should be hot pink. The trick with most fluorescent paints I've used is patience. They often have pretty terrible coverage, especially what I'm using here, which is an airbrush paint. Pretty unideal. Take your time and apply layer after layer, and slowly but surely, the intensity will build into something that is unachievable with normal paint. With everything now complete on the model, let's paint the base rim and seal his fate. This model was surprisingly satisfying to paint. Generally speaking, when I have someone sculpt a model for me, the process is very laborious. There is a ton of back and forth modifying very small details. I'll often paint a test model and come back with more feedback for the sculptor. I didn't have that kind of time for a standard YouTube video, so we did 2 rounds of feedback and then I just sent it. While there are some small changes I would still make to this model, none of them are game changers. This model has very simple volumes to execute, and it made me feel like I knew what I was doing. I never had to guess at what I was painting, which is always a good feeling while hobbying. I suppose this could be a testament to the sculptors over at Fiverr, which you can check out with a discount linked in the description. I think the paint job is a good callback to the character in the video game, but what do you think? Did I miss an important detail, or were my changes not too reference-breaking? Another purple MOBA character in the bag. Maybe I should paint a purple League of Legends character next? Lol, JK, League is for babies. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you are a mini painting and MOBA fan, I have another video for you where I paint Fade, a character from Heroes of Newerth. If you dig the channel and you want to support it, there are many ways you can do that, namely a Patreon campaign with a bunch of fun rewards, like a Discord server where you can hang out and chat about your miniature painting projects, or, while Dota is obviously better than League, you can also buy hobby tools that I recommend from affiliate links down in the description, and also buy my model, the Duchess, and a digital course that goes along with it, teaching you how to paint the model, brushstroke for brushstroke. Subscribe or die! But most importantly,
Don't forget to paint more minis!